This is Inside the Apple Studio, the podcast that details the intersection of architecture and Apple and explores how architects and other design professionals use Apple products in the practice of architecture. With your host, architect Neil Pan. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. In this special episode, Anthony Frausto-Robledo, founder of Architosh, is joining me to talk about the Apple event Peak Performance from March 8th, 2022. Thanks for joining me, Anthony.
Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful time to be a Mac user.
Absolutely. Well, in addition to some new Macs, at the event, Apple showed off an iPad refresh, a new iPhone SE with 5G, and as previously mentioned, an all-new Mac. The first time in a number of years we've actually seen like an entirely new Mac, I think since maybe really the Mac Mini, and a standalone studio display. Overall, Anthony, what'd you think of the event?
I thought it was great. I mean, my mind is completely focused on the Mac. Obviously the other devices are wonderful, but I think the Mac Studio is a really important departure for Apple. I love the fact that it's headless. I don't think the world ultimately responded very well to the iMac Pro in the terms of the segments that could adopt it. I know I had one, or have one actually still in my practice. It's a wonderful machine, but it has just one screen. And, the reality is that people in the AEC market increasingly use dual screen setups. It's just more practical on so many levels. You can outfit your office and put your employees close together. They don't need huge layout spaces anymore because your second monitor is your layout space. And I love working that way. I think it's much more efficient. I've been working that way for several years now, and I can't tell you how dramatic a change it has made for me in terms of productivity. So this is a wonderful direction for Apple to go. I completely applaud it. I think it's going to do very well. I think the M1 Max version of the new Studio Mac will do very well. I think the Ultra version will also do very well. That's my quick little take. I'm curious what you feel about it.
Well, I'd probably second everything you just said. I agree. The iMac Pro was an odd Mac because it came at a time where it seemed that Apple was kind of abandoning the Pro market. And then they had this little mea culpa and decided, no, we're actually, they brought in some tech writers and said, no, we're committed to the Pro market, and you're going to see that. And what we saw was an iMac Pro that I think when it came out in late 2017, the idea behind it was this was going to be the Pro Mac for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realized maybe that wasn't such a great idea for some of the reasons you just said. I mean, I work with a dual monitor setup, and I think a lot of people in the AEC market, that's just standard. And if you're working from a laptop, like I was for a couple of years there, I had a 3-monitor setup. And Apple didn't really have an offering for that. And then they came out with the Mac Pro, but that was just like ridiculously expensive. And I think for most AEC people, that was just too far outside of the price range. And so I think bringing this device in as the Studio, Mac Studio, I want to say Macintosh Studio. I don't know why, but Mac Studio, I'll get used to it, I guess. But it just seems like it's the right machine for this and many other markets. And I think this is going to be a real big home run for them.
Yeah, I do too. It's there's a lot of things changing in our industry, the architecture industry, that favor this machine at this time. The big one being the GPU accelerated real-time ray tracing. And it's pretty thrilling to see that the M1 Ultra chip actually matches the performance. And someone has already, well, this is what Apple's saying. of the NVIDIA RTX 3090, which is a beast of a card. I happen to have a 3070 in a box workstation in my studio at home. It's an incredible piece of hardware, really incredibly fast. The reality that you can match that performance for, I think, 200 watts less energy is just really, it's game changer. That is a real game changer. And what I love about these Mac Studio machines, well, it's just the one machine with the two different processor options, but it's small enough where you can just grab it and go. That was something that people kind of did with the 2013 Mac Pro, the little trash can Mac.
Right.
And I've literally been to events, like at the Boston Society of Architects, CAD industry events, where people who were guest speaking came in with that Mac, which is considerably bigger, in a little carrying case. It was toteable. This machine is even more toteable. It might weigh surprisingly more. I guess the one that has the copper cooling is for the Ultra is a little heavier, but it's very toteable, which is nice. Mobility is important now. We saw that with the COVID-19 transformation when people had to do remote work. They kind of had to grab their computer and go home. People literally took their workstations home. Companies quickly outfitted people with mobile computers at home. I ran a piece on Architosh a while ago on Flansburgh out of Boston, a big Boston practice. They were already on mobile laptops throughout their practice for the most part. They are an all Mac shop, and they just simply grabbed their MacBooks and took them home. And that's how they were working through the pandemic. So you can imagine if we ever had a future in pandemic, hope we don't, grab one of these guys, put it in your bag and go home. It's a fantastic piece of hardware. And I actually like the aesthetics that Apple's been going with lately. I think, we're post Johnny Ive era. And I'm not sure if you pick up on what people think about that much, but, there's something about the kind of straightforwardness to the Apple aesthetics that they're evolving to. And I could see that as well.
Well, adding ports to the front of this machine, I think, is an indication of Johnny Ive didn't have something to do with this.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. Right. It's practical. There's a kind of Tim Cook kind of practicality that you can feel now in the hardware. I'm not sure if it's Tim Cook, but there is certainly something that is reminiscent of the kind of straightforwardness how he runs the company, now showing in the actual design, the aesthetics of the machine.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, you mentioned the M1 Max, but now we have an M1 Ultra that Apple surprised everyone with. Oh, there's a hidden feature of the M1 Max that we can actually pair these two together. And, there was some hints of this, I think maybe a year or so ago with some rumors. What I think you even wrote about this.
Yes, it was Gurman from Bloomberg, Mark. He wrote, it wasn't quite a year ago. It was, I think I last wrote about it in October of 2021. And based on everything that he had sort of shared in his reports for Bloomberg, he spoke about the code names for the Apple Silicon transition. And he had 4 code names. Jade C Chop was one, Jade C Die was the next, Jade 2C Die was the third, and there was a Jade 4C Die. And I think in my reporting, I took this in a direction that was ultimately wrong. I thought that Apple would use chiplet technology to basically take the original M1 and maybe a bigger version of it and start to basically put it on a silicone, a larger silicone die, and approach it the way AMD has been approaching it with their processors. That's not where Apple has gone. My mistake, I think, was that I had the original M1 chip as part of this for codename scenario, but I realize now that that's not probably correct. What we received, what the market has received from Apple a few days ago is what I believe is Jade 2C die. And what we're seeing literally is we're seeing two M1 Max chips that are paired together with the Apple Fusion technology.
So what do you think is next? Is there a 4 quad version of this, or because
I do. I think that's what's next, but I don't know how it will work. It's brilliant the way Apple has done it. First of all, if we back up a little bit and go back to the M1 Pro chip,
sure,
if you look at that chip, and if you go to Apple site and you look at all 4 of them as a family and you zoom into them, at that time, people were writing about this. I wrote about this. The M1 Pro and the M1 Max are sort of, they are roughly one half of each other. Like the Max, you can see the half of the Max in the M1 Pro. That's very present, and people literally overlap them and overlap their photographs to demonstrate that. So I guess going back to Mark Gurman, the 2C die is versus the Jade C die, where you have Jade 2C die. I believe that's the difference between the M1 Pro, which would be 1 die, and the 2 die, Jade 2C die would be. I'm sorry. I have that wrong. I think Chop. I'm sorry. Chop is the M1 Pro, and M1 Max would then be the Jade C die.
Right.
Now, when you get 2 versions of that, then you have what we have in the Ultra with the interposer between the 2. And it's funny because Apple, I believe, has pulled a little bit of a trick on us, because if you look at the original photography, and I have to dig through that to find that, if you look at the original M1 Max chip photography, it doesn't show this bar all the way across, which is the Apple Fusion link, right?
Right.
Now they're showing it. And they show it for the M1 Max when it's by itself. I don't know why. And they show it, of course, with the Ultra, and that's the linkage between. So they're taking 2 of these to make the Ultra. And that's how we end up with a really large chip that would be impractical to actually lay out on a wafer and try to do runs on a wafer with that size of a actual, and that, especially that shape. It's like it's like 2 squares. It's a very tall rectangle. You would end up with like profound waste on the wafer.
Now, what I find interesting, though, is that Apple was pretty clear that this was the end of the line for the M1 family of chips.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do see a quad version of this at some point, it likely will be with an M2, I would assume.
Yes, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And that works out with the timing. I think this is the end. And so what I think is going to happen is what Apple's done is developed a strategy for maximum utilization of a typical wafer. And I have no proof that they do it this way, but it seems to me that you could etch onto a wafer the M1 chips into the edges, because they're the smallest chip, to get the maximum utilization of the real estate of a round wafer. Mm-hmm. And then to let the bigger chips fill in the middle. And if they did that, they would, I think they would be maximizing each wafer run and getting the most out of a wafer for a variety of chips. And of course, some of them, when they test them, do not have little faults, and they bin those chips, and then they'll configure those with less, working cores. So you pay less for, you might get a 2 cores less or 4 cores less version of a chip. Right. I haven't spent time to look at the Ultra yet in the new Max in the Mac Studio to see how Apple is configuring this in terms of various options, but I would be surprised if there's some lower core options.
Yeah, they have two essentially, which they start with the 64 gig and what is it, 48 core, which is essentially a doubling of the Max 24 and 32 gig model or chip.
Right.
And then they have a second option, which is basically the double of the larger Max version, which is 32 and 64, which then jumps to 64 and 128. So those are the two options that they have.
Okay, I see. Interesting. So the question is, you're right. What is Jade 4C die? 2C die. The die, if Jade C die is the max, and 2C is just doubling that die to get to Ultra, are we quadding to get the next version? And given the timing, it most likely would be the M2, but we don't really know when Apple's going to release. I think it's going to be the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the machine that's really going to blow the market up on some level, I believe. Just looking at the performance. Yeah, are you aware of the performance comparison of the Ultra to some of the other chips out there?
No, go ahead and talk about it.
Yes, for instance, some of the more performant and exciting processors lately that would fit into our market would be AMD's Ryzen 9, the 5000 series, particularly the 5950X, which is a 16-core chip. And it has fantastic balance, I would say, between single-threaded processing, multi-threaded processing. And then, of course, Intel's newest Core i9 processor, the 12900K. That's another 16-core chip, and it's currently kind of reigning champ in single-threaded work. So that's a great processor for CAD, BIM modeling. Mm-hmm. And then, if we want to look at, I think one of the things that I think Tom's Hardware Guide or something like that I read about the AMD Ryzen Threadripper 3990X, which is a 64-core monster, and that has a Geekbench score for multi-threaded that's just a little over the M1 Ultra. It's at 25,133 for the Threadripper 3990X, compared to the Ultra at 24,055. So really, really close scores there. And to look at that in a per core level is just incredible, because what Apple's doing with 20 cores to almost match a 64-core Threadripper is just really astounding.
And at a far less energy, too.
Far less energy. Yeah, far less energy.
Now, what does that mean for architects doing basic CAD work or basic rendering or real-time rendering? How does that translate?
I think it only translates when your software is taking advantage and is multi-threaded. And of course, most rendering software is. Now, what's beautiful about this is that the new Ultra version has phenomenal GPU capability. So whether you are using a GPU accelerated renderer or a CPU accelerated renderer, you're going to get you have a chip that can take advantage of both. I think with the AEC market, the way it has been evolving with real-time ray tracing, I think the Max version or the Ultra version make great options for the AEC market. You really don't need the Ultra version unless you render all the time. But for the average architect who is working at, say, Revit and utilizing one of the there's now many tools out there. It could be Enscape, for example. Mm-hmm. this machine is going to provide excellent performance. Now, of course, Revit doesn't run on the Mac, so that's not a good example. But maybe ArchiCAD or Vectorworks or another tool. Or people sometimes will be using a dedicated renderer with various modelers like SketchUp. But as you know, and we've talked about this before, CAD in general and 3D modeling in general don't take advantage of multi-threading very well.
Right.
It's just the mathematics don't work out very well. Everything needs to be done in kind of more sequentially. And there again, I think that's where the balance between single core and multi-core matters so much. And honestly, before the latest Intel chip, the Ryzen line, the Ryzen 5000 line provided a really excellent balance. But now Intel's latest is also right up there and actually better, a little bit better. And these, it's nice to see that Apple's ARM-based processors are also providing a fairly strong balance, though they'll have to work a little harder, I think, to increase the performance of their for their single-threaded work, because they are now, while they are up there at 1793 in the Geekbench score, which is great, that's not where Intel is. Intel's at almost 2,000. So they're not the reigning champs at that right now, but they're certainly the reigning champs on a power per watt basis.
What can architecture software vendors do to take advantage of all the power that Apple has in these new Macs and these new chips?
You know, there are so many components in CAD and BIM and 3D applications, and modeling kernels is a big one. And you may be stymied by a third-party component that has not made the transition to Apple Silicon. Some important ones out there that have made that transition include the Parasolid modeling kernel by Siemens, Texoc 3Ds, all their SDKs for CAD industry are now Apple Silicon native. So if you're using those components to build applications, then you're going to be ready. And then of course, you're going to rewrite all your code base for Apple Silicon, for the ARM instruction set. If you use Apple's tools to do that, you should be in pretty good shape. And if you've been working already with iOS tools, iOS apps, if you're producing those, you already have, you may have some code already ready. If you have tools that are for the iPad, for example.
What do you think now that we have these new chips? We have a whole new Mac in the Mac Studio. Apple finally, after almost 7 years after discontinuing their last, what would be considered affordable separate display, they now have a new Studio display. What do you think of that?
I think that Studio display is a welcome departure from the super high-end expensive one, but I still think it costs way too much for outfitting engineers and architects. The whole AEC industry, if that's going to be your only screen, maybe the kind of work you would do would warrant that. But again, the data that I see out there, the data that vendors like some of the other hardware vendors share their data with us when we release information about GPUs in particular, right? Because this is what you're plugging your monitors into. They're saying that the bulk of configurations out there in the CAD industry are dual 2K monitors, a single 4K paired with a 2K, or just a single 4K. That's the dominant mix. And if you have a 100-person architectural office, a lot of hardware, you're going to try to economize, and you're going to outfit everyone probably with a dual 2K monitor. That would be, if you're doing BIM all day long, why do you need larger than that? Mm-hmm. And that's not where you would want to put your resources, which are scarce. You want to put scarce resources that yield higher economic output. So you're going to put them into your processors. You're going to put them into maybe your software. So But I work with both a 4K and a 2K setup, and the screens to me look the same for my work. So I'm not sure why it's worth moving it to 4K or dual 4K. So I think obviously what I love about this move is it's giving people the ability to move off of iMacs in studios and to move to machines that they can pair with their own displays. And the other thing that's nice about this is that firms might want to lease their machines, lease their hardware so that they can keep tight cycles like 24 months, 36-month cycles, so they can stay on top of performance. But then they can invest in screens and keep those for at least 2 cycles, maybe 3 cycles. In other words, possibly the 9 years before they change out displays, but at least 6. And that I think those are good smart economic decisions to make.
Now, what's the average cost of my own edification? Because I don't follow it that well, but like a decent 4K or 2K monitor that you might outfit that you're talking about in an architectural office?
$500, $600.
Yeah,
maybe okay. $800. Depends on the quality in the manufacturer.
Right. So you could outfit each workstation, if you will, at roughly $1,000, give or take, for 2 monitors in comparison to, say, one of these at $1,600.
That's right.
Yeah. I have I don't know if it's a 2K, but I definitely have in the office I'm in right now. There's a 4K paired with like a 2K. And the one thing that drives me insane is that the pixel density is different. And so as I drag one window, if you will, across to another, it blows up or doubles in size. And that kind of bothers me. So I'd prefer either 2K on both sides or 4K on both sides. I want them to be the same.
No, I agree. That's how I work too. I like that better. That's interesting. Yeah. I have an iMac Pro paired to a 2K monitor, and the iMac's not a 2K monitor. It's a bigger resolution. You got to get your resolution to match.
Right.
And so I think what's beautiful about the Mac Studio is the flexibility and it gives studios across multiple industries. I mean, when they committed and they sat down with press to tell them that they were serious about the professional market, they weren't abandoning it, that people were getting the wrong signal, I think they got great feedback. And I think that for Apple, I think that process was significant. That was a significant moment for them when they recommitted to the market, because they then geared up for the market again from almost like from a new perspective. And they spoke to a lot of people. And I think machines we're starting to see now descend from those initial conversations and all the conversations that followed. Another thing that I think they've realized too was when the M1 Mac Mini came out, a lot of people bought it. That was the first M1 machine I bought, and the reason why you bought that machine is because it kicked ass, and it was so affordable, and it's such a small little thing. I have mine tucked behind my monitor, so it's actually vertical, up against the wall, pinned, and it's very efficient to have the machine that's not on the floor, but everything's up on the desk, and you have the ability to plug, like you said, plugging into things in the front, your peripherals. It's just easier. So I think that may have played a factor in them realizing, people are buying these Mac Minis with the M1 chip in them in probably much larger numbers, and why not go in that direction and take that form factor and make it a little bigger, taller, whatever, so you can end up where we're at today with the Mac Studio.
I think it'd be really curious. I think there's an opening in Apple's lineup right now and I'm kind of surprised they didn't fill it with a Mac Mini with an M1 Pro, not the M1 Max, but throw an M1 Pro or make that as an option for a higher end Mac Mini that might fill the gap between I mean, that I think that Mac Mini is somewhere around $800. So, maybe the Mac Mini with an M1 Pro is 1,000 or 11 or 1,200, and then you can pair that with a couple of 2K or 4K monitors, and you probably have got a decent setup for most applications in an architectural office. And then for those that need the more power, you get the M1 Max Studio model, and you're probably good to go. And Apple gives you quite a few options there. I'm surprised they didn't go in that direction, or maybe they will. They just haven't done it yet.
I think they will go in that direction when the chips advance to another process node. When they are able to advance to another process node, you might be able to accomplish that because of the thermals as the chips shrink. So I could see that happening. One of the things that's awesome about the modularity of how they are approaching the market is that we see this with the phones. Is as a new generation of, say, phones come along, or iPads, the older technology is often still made available. You can buy the older models at lower cost. So there's this trickle down effect where you can economize. And I'm not sure if they're going to do that in the Mac space like that, but they could across maybe some product lines that are higher volume, right?
Yeah.
So we might see M1 chips still powering some devices when we move up to the M2. It's possible we might have a lower end version of a Mac Mini with an M1 chip in it, and the same exact machine looks the same, perhaps minor cosmetic differences, and it has an M2. And so we're going to get a more incremented product line that is smartly deployed using the scarcity of the chips that they produce. You can see how they're accomplishing this now. They're rolling out the M1 in more and more iPads. So I think that's really smart. It enables them to maximize their investment in all this semiconductor work.
So, Anthony, do you think that with the beginning of the M1, and I think we talked a little bit about this when we spoke the first time, do you think that now that we're seeing a little bit more of the M1 and the Apple Silicon Playbook, and now with the introduction of the Apple Studio machine, do you think that the AEC software industry is going to embrace the Mac a little bit more than they have and release software, at least that's compatible with Mac, that, say, wasn't compatible before? Or do you think that the obstacle of bringing their software over to Metal is still going to be a barrier when it comes to high-end rendering and other VR types of applications?
I actually think that Apple is the initial wedge that's going to cascade a big transition in software. I think that the industry cannot help but take notice that this performance per watt advantage is massive over x86, in which case we're talking about AMD and Intel. And we already know that Qualcomm acquired Nuvia, which was a spinoff of Apple's leading chip architects in 2019 when they left to create Nuvia. Mm-hmm. And we know Microsoft is developing ARM-based chips now too. So what we know is that there's going to be a future for Windows on ARM that's bigger than what it is today. It exists today, but it hasn't had the processors, the competitive processors. And so if ARM continues to advance at the current rate that it's been advancing for years, and basically essentially give x86 a very good absolute performance run for its money, not just watt wise, then I think we're going to see a big transition in the industry to ARM-based chips, and everyone's going to have to rewrite their software. And at that point, if you're rewriting for ARM, say you're rewriting AutoCAD or Revit, let's say Revit for ARM. For Windows, you're gonna take the step to make sure it runs on Apple Silicon. Why wouldn't you? I mean, this is it's just smart to do that. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's happening, and I think what we're seeing now too is companies like Enscape has announced that they have a Mac version coming that's Apple Silicon ready. I think they're approaching that in 2 steps, right? Because you can approach it in a way where you can get on the Mac and it can run through Rosetta, but that's not truly that's not Apple Silicon native.
Right.
And then of course, but they're committed to a native version. And when you see machines like this, like the new Ultra chip, that people are going to take notice. People are going to get these machines, and they're going to start demanding that the software's made for them.
Yeah. So, did you put your order in?
Not yet.
Not yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I think the Ultra may replace my iMac Pro at work. I mean, the iMac was even more money than what the Ultra goes for. Like a lot of studios, we lease our machines. Mm-hmm. We lease them because we want to have a constant IT expenditure year to year, month to month, mm-hmm. and so that we can monitor our budgets. And it's pretty exciting to know that we're actually going to make such a huge jump from an Intel-based $5,000 single monitor machine to a machine that is sans monitor, but has a lot more power, and is less money. And I already have one of the 2K monitors ready to pair up. I just need to probably get another one or matching 1 or 2 more or whatever. But I think, when you look at the progress Apple's making with their chips, I think what they said early on initially at the M1 launch is that they were going to take full advantage of the thermals within each enclosure of their Mac product line at the silicon level, meaning they would maximize their thermals. Now, when we're talking about Jade 4C die, or we're talking about the last remaining machine, which is the Mac Pro, and there's been rumors that there's 2 versions of that, right? They said they were going to do a full-size version, like the case they have now, and then maybe a smaller version. We may have 2 machines coming, 2 more machines that are fundamentally different. One might be. I could easily see the current Mac Studio being a little taller version, right? You could imagine that getting like twice as tall, right? Mm-hmm. Or something maybe a little deeper. But what's exciting is to think about is what they're going to do with their full scale tower, because the thermal capacity of a big box like that is so much larger. And that's where you stick in, where you can get 200 watts in an enclosure like that. This version of the chip, most powerful Mac chip ever, is I think it's at 60 watts.
Yeah, something like that.
Really small. Yeah, that's small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, right?
Right. All right. Well, any final thoughts on the event itself, or what you're ultimately excited about, of what this is going to lead to in the AEC market and for architects in general?
Yeah. So what I'm most excited about is that Apple is clearly demonstrating that the ARM architecture has some serious performance legs. And what's exciting about it is that it is actually, I like that it is highly performant on a watt basis. It gives us greater mobility. It's better for the environment to use less energy. I love that. It's better for your electric bill at the office or at home. Love all those things. Why I like all that so much is it's undergirding a serious transformation change, which should, over this decade, proliferate out and affect the whole market on multiple operating systems, like Windows in particular. And that might open up and liberate, democratize a lot of software tools that are in various industries. But if I want to talk about the architecture industry in particular, democratize tools that haven't been on the Mac yet, right? And we don't need to mention names, but there's I think that's going to make a more interesting market, a more competitive market. It's just going to be, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, definitely a good start to the 2020s.
Absolutely.
At least for Apple. Yeah. It's going to be some exciting times.
Yeah. And, just one final thought, NVIDIA was trying to buy ARM. They didn't. That got basically, they abandoned that. I think ultimately that's good. I think it gives, NVIDIA can start making ARM chips for workstations, PCs, gaming machines, whatever. We may see ARM chips back in the gaming consoles again in a big way. We may we're going to see ARM chips in data centers. And AMD and Intel can make ARM chips. So there's a lot of room. It's exciting to think about MediaTek too, out of Taiwan, and there's so many different players. I love competition because sharp competition usually brings a lot of progress, and that's good for us end users.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, thank you for joining me today to talk about this event. And can you let the listeners know where they can find you online to talk to you more about this or to read more of your writing?
Sure. You can find the writing at architosh.com and on Twitter. Twitter handle is Architosh, and on Facebook and LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn readers group, and we also have an Architosh business page on LinkedIn. So 4 different areas in terms of social media where people can learn about Architosh and what we do and what we write about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks again to everyone for listening to this special episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Be sure to follow the show in your favorite podcast player by searching for Inside the Apple Studio and tap the follow button. If you like this special episode, let me know. And if you're enjoying Inside the Apple Studio, be sure to leave a 5-star rating and comment in Apple Podcasts. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.